world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Thursday, February 26th, as I am recording this. Now doing it much, much later than I ever anticipated. Sat down to do some TikToks, was going to record the podcast. Ended up with not enough time to record before I ended up recording the Rational Boomer podcast. Now, tomorrow, Friday the 27th, I'm going to be the guest over on the Rational Boomer podcast. Now, by the time this actually gets up and published, it may already be the 27th. So if that's the case, it would be today's episode of the Rational Boomer podcast. Either way, check me out over on the Rational Boomer podcast for Friday, the 27th. Mike and I sat down for about an hour and a half. I think it was closer to the hour and a half mark like it normally is. And we talk about a lot of things. And some of those are going to get covered here yet again. Now, we got a lot to talk about, like I say, almost every day, because there's always a lot to talk about with this administration. Donald Trump comes off of a disastrous State of the Union, in my opinion. Yeah, he talked for almost 2 hours, but he didn't say anything. He didn't really have any good points. He has the State of the Union Tuesday night, and it's not really a rallying cry. He doesn't give his party much to cheer about, so they're cheering at everything. And if you ask me, it was a complete and total joke. Now, with the State of the Union, one of the few times that he got the Democrats to stand and cheer and clap was when he said that the Democrats boycott or tried to vote against, rather, the one big beautiful bill and the largest tax cut in history. And they took that as a badge of honor. And guess what? They were right to do so. Now, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson says the average American family is going to be saving $10,000 a year, or going to have an additional $10,000 a year because of that tax cut that they put forward. But how does that work when the top earners were the ones that got the tax cut? The people in the middle really didn't get a tax cut. And, depending on how much you're making, there's a lot of people around me. I'm one of the lucky ones doing a little better, but there's a lot of people that are making 30 grand a year. How are you getting, a third additional? It's just not happening. But they're trying to spell out and to make it seem like a win. Now, one of the things that people are realizing that they were all happy about and they were excited for, and Donald Trump made it seem like it was going to be this great big thing, was no taxes on tips and no taxes on overtime. Well, it wasn't no taxes on tips and it wasn't no taxes on overtime. It was limited, and there were conditions. First of all, for tips, it sounds like it has to be cash only, and a lot of people were not recording the entirety of their tips, so they weren't being taxed on it anyway. So saying no tax on tips did not really fix anything. And if it did anything, it got you to report more of your tips if you actually did that, and then they could penalize you for misreporting your income down the road, or from previous years, rather. The whole thing was a joke. Now, the no tax on overtime. A lot of people thought it was going to mean more money in their paycheck week to week, which is what Donald Trump actually claimed it would do. But that's not what they passed. What the law ended up being was a tax credit, or a deduction. I think it was a deduction, actually, that you take off around now as you are working on your taxes. So they want to make you believe that you are saving a whole bunch of money, but in fact, it's just a deduction, so you don't pay in as much, and maybe you get a slightly bigger refund. But then we find out the other half of this, which is what makes it a gotcha on the part of the Republican Party, and that is the fact that it's only on the half part of time and a half that is considered the actual overtime. Now, I've worked jobs that have handled it both ways. Um, but typically, in the last couple jobs I've had, they report your income, all of your base hours at one rate, and the halftime of time and a half, they only report the like, if you're making $20 an hour or whatever, your half would be 10. So the number of hours of overtime you get times $10. And that's what they do. Now, I've seen other places where they take the hours of overtime and they put those hours and it's times your actual overtime rate, which using my $20 example would be 30. Um, and it comes out the same either way. It's just how they want to record it on your pay stub. But what I'm getting at here is you're finding out that only that little bit, the half of your time and a half, is what was tax free, not nearly the deal that they told you. And the Democrats had every right to celebrate about trying to block Donald Trump's tax cuts. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if they don't try to reverse his tax cuts when they get the presidency back after 28. The problem is, and this is a flaw that we have here in America that we have to somehow figure out how to get around, is when you start talking about raising taxes, you end up in a situation where people say, well, I don't want my taxes going up. You could be talking about raising taxes on people who have over $1 billion in the bank. And, I know people in this area where I live who are barely making $10 to $15 an hour, and they go, and we've had this discussion, and I've said they should tax billionaires more, and they come back with, well, I don't want my taxes going up, and I'm like, you're not making $1 billion. You will never cumulatively ever have $1 billion. And they always come back with, well, if I work hard enough, one of these days I'll make it. They have bought in so far to the American dream mentality that if they work hard enough, if they try hard enough, that they will end up making it somehow, and they will make the bucks required to get to be that ultra rich standpoint. This is what the Republicans thrive on. They want the poorly educated, the MAGAs or whatever you want to call them, to believe that they have a chance at actually getting out of the misery of or the day-to-day drive, the mud and the muck of living paycheck to paycheck, that if they just try hard enough, eventually they will get out. Not realizing, like Donald Trump loves to brag about how he got a small loan, but it was something like $5 million in what would have been the 70s, which was a lot of money by comparison. Um, but he says, "Oh, I just got a small loan," and he got multiple small loans from his dad, Fred Trump, throughout the years. I remember one story we heard. I think I might have heard it first over on the Rational Boomer podcast, but somebody had dug into it a little bit, and there was a time one of Donald Trump's casinos was failing, and his dad, Fred Trump, goes in and sends somebody down with $1 million or a couple of million or whatever it was to the poker room in one of his casinos, and they do a cash transaction. He puts the cash on the table, he buys the poker chips, never plays a single hand, and leaves. So, as far as the casino is concerned, they just made $1 million that somebody never bet. It's sitting out there in poker chip, is currency. But since it was never cashed in, they never took it back to the cage to get their money or do anything with it. It was basically a donation, and it's all tax free and it's all legal. Sort of. I mean, I think if they would have looked deep enough into it, they might have had questions. But it, at least on the initial appearance, it appears to be on the up and up. And that's the problem with Donald Trump. He has gotten bailed out numerous times from varying people and varying banks, and he has always found a way to land on his feet. And that's one of the things that's driving him nuts right now. He does this State of the Union where he comes out high energy right off the bat, and they had to get over a threshold, I think. He wanted to get over a certain length before, or at least his handlers did. They wanted him to speak for at least so long before he slipped back into the lower energy, uh, almost slobbering um, problem that he is now. Like his, um, you know, mouthful of spit, and he's sucking saliva speech that he's now known for. They wanted to get him past that to a certain point, and they did. I think, but he was struggling, and his health did not look very good at the State of the Union. I think I talked about it on yesterday's podcast. Um, by the second hour, he's leaning real heavy. He hasn't done his accordion hands from a standing position for a long time. A lot of times now he is gripping the podium. He's looking worse. His lean by the end was way more pronounced. And something I saw over on TikTok, something somebody pointed out that I hadn't noticed. But at one point during his speech, and I think the reason I didn't notice it is during the bulk of his speech, I was on a live with Trucker T over on TikTok, and I had my laptop sitting here up and open, but I wasn't really watching what he said. I was more listening to what he said while carrying on a conversation on the live as well. But anyway, Donald Trump, at a couple different points, he's talking, and something comes flying out of his mouth and lands on the desk in front or the podium in front of him. And a medical professional I saw on TikTok was speculating that it is probably a tonsil stone. And that could be. And that, if that is the case, if he is having tonsil stones that are, and those things are happening, they can be a sign of somebody who is having trouble swallowing. Donald Trump is not in the best of health, and his time might be short. I think that is part of why he is trying to do everything he can to cement his legacy. Now, I've mentioned this, I believe, on Truckers Live and over on the Boomer podcast, but I'm going to mention it again. I saw a TikTok by somebody, and I don't remember who. It might have been Old Man Murphy, but anyway, doesn't matter. This person, whoever it was, said one of the last things Donald Trump should ever hear as he is gasping for air, taking his final breath, somebody should lean down, whisper in his ear, and say, "We will erase you from history like you never existed." That is the one thing that Donald Trump fears more than anything else. Everything he is doing is about being remembered, about being the best. You know, he comes out and he talks during the State of the Union that he should be really going on through his third term. Well, no, you don't get three terms. The Constitution is very clear. You get two, and you only get a partial term and two full terms if you are a VP who fills in for somebody else. That's it. Those are the only exceptions, and that is all that ever happens. But see, Donald Trump wants that third term. He wants the recognition. He wants the praise. He wants to be remembered for doing something nobody else did. This is some of what he is going for, and he's pushing. And that's one of the reasons why he wants the Nobel Peace Prize is because A, he's jealous of Barack Obama, but B, they would be talking about him long after he is gone. He would be in discussions. When he is having discussions about, he wants his name remembered, he wants his legacy. Donald Trump is a narcissist first and foremost. And what he wants is uh, to be remembered. Now, today, the House Oversight Committee, switching gears here, but the House Oversight Committee had a meeting in New York. And they were, I don't think they were at the residence of the Clintons, but they were nearby. And much like what they did for Les Wexner, they went to the people that were going to be deposed. And today was the day that Hillary Clinton got deposed. Now, what did Hillary Clinton tell them? Not a damn thing. She basically said from the get go, don't know, I don't know Jeffrey Epstein, never met him, didn't know anything about anything that he did. And what are you trying to prove here? Basically, they're just trying to uh, run her through the mud because she has been their nemesis going back to her days as first lady. And I think part of it has to do with the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Because now I don't remember all of the Monica Lewinsky scandal that well. First of all, it was the mid 90s. Second of all, I was in high school. I didn't entirely know what was going on. However, I do still remember that those were the days of, uh, you still would interrupt TV programs for something big like this. And they were doing coverage of the impeachment of uh, Bill Clinton. And I remember him having to answer questions like under oath. And one of the questions, he seemed so slick. And I think that's one of the reasons why he got the nickname Slick Willie was during this time frame. I could be wrong, and if I am, I hope you guys correct me in the comments. Uh, but I remember them being asked. There was some question, and he got asked, "Well, something about this. Is this what really what happened, or whatever, or what? It's something like that." And he goes, "That depends on what your definition of the word is, or something like that." He just seemed very slick. But see, I remember some of the conversation around Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And I remember some of the media talking about it. And they were upset that she stuck with Bill Clinton. And there were people talking, and I do seem to remember media reports saying, well, that she was probably staying with him for that we've never had a president be divorced during his administration and things like that, talking about historical precedent and stuff. And, you know, I think that is part of why the Republicans, using their moral high ground that they claim to have, um, they like to think they are the moral majority when they are a very vocal minority. Um, and I think that was one of the reasons they didn't like her. But they have never really liked Hillary Clinton. Going all the way back, not only the Monica Lewinsky scandal, you go forward. Uh, they didn't like the fact that she comes out and then runs for a Senate seat, becomes a senator because she didn't fit the mold of former first lady. Most former first ladies, after their husband's time in the Oval Office in the White House is done, they just kind of putter off and they don't do much. Look at how often do we talk about George W. Bush? George W. Bush does not come up in conversation very often anymore. And his wife doesn't come up very often. The only one who gets talked about for the most part, to some extent, we hear about Michelle Obama and the Obamas as a whole, but for the most part, you don't hear about former first ladies. And they kind of wanted her to do that. They wanted her to slip off into obscurity and just be forgotten. And she didn't do that. She runs, becomes a senator. And then after being a senator, Barack Obama gets elected. She becomes Secretary of State. And they just were not happy with her being in that role. So they wanted to embarrass her by doing this big meeting. And they go ahead and they have this meeting and they call her in to testify. And she's like, yeah, I don't know anything about Epstein. But this was all a power play. Remember, she wanted it to be done under as a public hearing. They wanted to do it under closed door, which is what it ultimately was. It was a closed door deposition. Um, but she sat for it, didn't have to, could have said no. I mean, we saw Jim Jordan and other members of Congress refuse congressional subpoenas with nothing happening to them. So apparently, you don't have to answer a congressional subpoena. Now, I guarantee you, if Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton had defied a congressional subpoena, they would have tried to launch something through the DOJ and tried to compel them to testify and everything else. So, sounds like for multiple hours of testimony, they got nothing out of Hillary Clinton at all. Now, something did happen during Hillary Clinton's testimony, and they paused it for a while, in part because Republicans broke the rules. Now, one of the things that they had agreed upon when it came to her testimony was that it was going to be, um, you know, closed doors and it wasn't going to be released to the public initially until attorneys and the Clintons had a chance to look everything over and figure out what was going to be released and all of those things. Well, apparently, Lauren Boebert broke the rules that were given, and she snapped a couple pictures, maybe even through Snapchat, I'm not sure, of Hillary Clinton sitting there testifying and sent them to right wing commentator uh, Benny Johnson. And he immediately shared them, of course. Now, I talked about this with Mike a little bit, and Mike thought it was somebody else, Nick Shirley, I think. And it might have been because we had been talking about Nick Shirley for something else. But anyway, um, Benny Johnson was the one who leaked them and point the figure right back at Lauren Boebert. Now, Lauren Boebert is um, a piece of shit, and we know this. She was caught doing things to a guy fling she was with at a Beetlejuice performance, um, among other things. She's not great, uh, so I'm not surprised that she did that. But this was considered a serious breach, and they had to pause the testimony and talk about it, etc. Now, am I surprised that the Republicans broke decorum by doing this? No. Remember, not last year, last Congress, during the second half of the Biden administration, the Republicans were doing their best to embarrass and investigate um, Joe Biden, and it didn't work out very well. But as they're doing all of this investigation, they had images of Hunter Biden. And remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene posted full, like printed out, poster sized images of uh, a naked Hunter Biden, brought him out and displayed him on the House floor. Just in an effort to embarrass Hunter Biden and Joe Biden by extension. So am I surprised that Republicans broke decorum by doing this? No. And of course, Benny Johnson was trying to say, well, last we finally got her under oath, where she can't lie or whatever. And like it was some big gotcha. Again, they have got this fascination with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton testified about Benghazi in front of Congress for 14 hours, I believe it was, or 17 hours, something like that. And she never broke. These Republicans think they have something. They think they're winning. They haven't realized yet that they are losing, and pulling stunts like this is playing to a base. It's playing to about 30% of the Republican Party, the MAGAs, the uneducated, but it's costing them the rest of the Republican Party and the independents. And one of the things Mike and I talked about on uh, the podcast is we talked about how that state seat in Texas flipped. It was like 31 percentage point shift or something for the Democrats, and how no seat is really safe in this country when you're talking a 31% shift as we gear into the midterms. And one of the things with that is it's independents. It's not so much Republicans not voting. It's the Republicans have lost the independents, those swing voters who will vote, uh, Republican, Democrat, or independent. Now, while we are on the topic of voting and voting independent, I want to remind people that independents do not have a chance realistically to win the presidency. And I'm going to be, if I'm still doing this podcast come 2028, I'm going to be beating this horse all the way till then. But look at Congress right now. There are realistically two parties. There are Republicans and there are Democrats. Those that are independent, there are no elected seats for the Green Party, the Socialist Party. I think there's even an American Nazi Party that has a few members nationwide, but doesn't actually have enough, momentum to gain anywhere. And there's all other parties, the Libertarians. Um, there's so many other third party groups, yet none of them have the momentum to even hold one seat in Congress. Not one Senate seat, not one representative on the state level, not one. So if, say, Jill Stein of the Green Party were to win the presidency in 2028, now it will never happen. But if she were to win the presidency in 2028, she would have to work with one party or the other. Have to. Because she would not get any of her ideas through Congress because there would be nobody there to introduce them. Voting for a third party does not work when it comes to the presidency. You have to get them elected to other offices. Look at your state level offices in your state, your state legislature. If you can vote them in there, maybe they can start making some routes toward gaining a little bit of power. It is not going to happen overnight, and it is not something that can be done overall and to be done quickly. Now, as we are in the primary season, one of the things Mike and I talked about is now is the time to push for the candidate you like. We were talking about the Texas Senate race, Talrico versus Jasmine Crockett. And I'm not in Texas. I can't vote for either of them. Now, from what I know of the two of them, and I admit, not my race, I prefer Jasmine Crockett. And if I could vote, that's who I would vote for in the primary. And if I was in Texas, I would push for Jasmine Crockett. That's just my opinion. And anybody who's in Texas could have other opinions. But if I was in Texas and Jasmine Crockett lost to Talrico in the primary, don't care for the most part about Talrico as far as do I like him? Do I think he was better? Should it have been Jasmine Crockett? I'm not going to protest in November by writing in Crockett. I'm not going to skip that race on the ballot. I'm going to vote for Talrico because it is more important that we get Republicans out of office right now, get the Democrats in power, at least in some level in Congress, so they can stop some of the madness that Donald Trump is doing. Then once the Democrats have power, then we can start fixing the Democratic Party. Is the Democratic Party perfect? No. Is it even close to perfect? No. The problem is, and especially now, even more so that the Republican Party has shifted farther and farther right. It is basically, if you are not a far right MAGA, anybody other than a far right MAGA is getting funneled into the Democratic Party. There are so many options with the Democratic Party. Like there are so many groups and so many ideas, it has become almost too big. One of the things that could happen is at some point, because they have gone so far right, the Republican Party may cease to exist. And For a few years, it may look like the Democrats are getting everything they want, and as they push through, and then you're going to see the Democrats split into two parties. That is one possible future because the far left, extreme progressives are going to say we're not progressive enough, and that's one of the problems we have in this country, specifically with the Democrats, that they are almost too all encompassing at this point, and they can't get along with each other. And they're doing things like saying, well, I don't want Jasmine Crockett or I don't want Talrico. Well, I'm going to prove to the party that they better respect my opinion, and I'm not going to vote in November. No, let's get the people we need elected first, then worry about fixing the ideologies because some of it may fix itself in the long run. Now, we are staring at the beginnings of primary season. And depending on what state you are in, changes when your primaries are. I know Iowa's primary for the Democrats, I think, is in June. And I'm watching that one, I'm waiting. And I fully plan to go support who I think is going to be the next Democratic governor of Iowa, Rob Sand, in part because he is the only elected statewide Democrat. But he talks more like an independent than he does a Democrat about working for everybody and where the Republicans have failed and have failed this state, and about how far down we have gone because we've had years of Republican rule. Now, one of the things he's been talking about that doesn't get a lot of play, and I know I talk a lot about Iowa politics, but you know, this is where I am, is there has been a budget shortfall left by this current administration. And she's doing everything she can, Kim Reynolds is, to not allow audits and things like that to justify it. And we have a surplus right now in the state treasury. Now, which is a good thing because unlike the federal government, states do not really get the option to go borrow money. If we don't have any money, we can't provide for those services. It's not like we can go into debt on the state level. Well, the problem is right now with where her budget is versus the um, that surplus we have sitting in the state coffers is if we don't do something to fix it, those state coffers are going to be empty. At some point, it's gonna go away. And right now, they are acting like it is an unlimited source of money, and it's not. So he's talking about that, about having to do things to shore up the state economy, to fix things long term, and try to right the ship. Now, we will see if he's ultimately the Democratic nominee for the state of Iowa, but I think he is at least on the right path. And we will see what happens here. Now, and here's the thing, like I was talking about, if I was in Texas with Jasmine Crockett and Talrico, I am in Iowa when it comes to Rob Sand. I'm going to push for Rob Sand to, win. And even though I really don't do a lot of guests on this podcast, if this gets to Rob Sand and he wants to be a guest on the show, I would love to have him as a guest on the show, talk to him for an hour, hour and a half, like we do when I'm a guest over on the Rational Boomer, and discuss politics, discuss his vision for the state. I know I'm a small creator by comparison to a lot of people, but I would love to have a discussion with Rob Sand and go forward about pushing him through to become the next governor. Now, that being said, even if he does appear, which I doubt that would ever happen, but if he would happen to be a guest on the show, and I did try everything I could to get him elected, and he still didn't pass the primary, and somebody else was the nominee, guess what? Unless they're a complete and total piece of shit, or they are a Republican running as a Democrat, somebody I'm not even talking about um, a Christian Cinema or a Rob Manchin. Maybe more like what Fetterman has become. or somebody like that. And there were some um, Republicans in both 22 and 24 that ran as Democrats, and we weren't watching close enough, and they were effectively MAGA. And the minute they got elected, they flipped parties. Unless it's somebody like that, I'm voting for the Democrat because we have to start putting Democrats in control. And I think what you're going to see, what would be interesting to me, would be if some of these states, Iowa, Texas, Florida, maybe, and Florida has a history, not recently, but going back just to the 2000 election for uh, Bush Gore, it almost went blue for Gore, and I believe it did go blue twice for Obama. I mean, Florida has a chance of being one that could flip, but I would love to see some of these states that are, that have been under Republican rule for so long now get back under Democratic control and watch them start to thrive, and people look around and go, man, this is better. The problem is once things start going really, really well, they forget how bad it could be under Republicans, and they get itching to go back. Well, let's try those Republicans again. Well, if things are this good, maybe if we change out who's in charge, maybe it'll get even better. Problem is, it doesn't work that way. Not at all. We've done this back and forth dance repeatedly with Republicans. We give them an inch, they get back in control of a little bit, and they fuck it all up again. Reagan fucked up the economy, and to a lesser extent, the time bomb of the Reagan economy hadn't fully hit by the time we got George H.W. Bush. And then George H.W. Bush comes along, and it looked like, because the economy was still kind of cruising along, doing okay, and those realities had not set in yet, everything was looking good, and it looked like he was going to get reelected pretty easily. Then the economy took a shit. Well, a Democrat who hadn't really been at the forefront of anybody's mind as far as being the nominee was Bill Clinton. And he kind of cruises in to get the nomination. And then after he gets the nomination, the economy takes a massive shit. And people went into that election in 92 and said, fuck this shit. We want somebody different. We want to change because clearly the Republicans aren't getting the job done. And we got 8 years of Bill Clinton, and we had some of the best years we've ever had. Bill Clinton, who ironically is going to be deposed Friday over the Epstein files, led some of the best economy ever. And then we get George W. Bush, and he crashes the economy again. Then Obama digs us out of the shit. Just in time for Trump to put us right back in, and Joe Biden was fixing the ship, and he was writing everything, and it was getting better, but it wasn't perfect. And we went, fuck, let's bring back the other guy again. Jesus Christ, this is a good idea. And it was one of the dumbest things we could have done. And people like myself and the Rational Boomer and others had warned people about how bad it could be. And I think a section of this country was not ready for that. Now, I mentioned Bill Clinton and his testimony before the Oversight Committee tomorrow on Friday. And his testimony is going to be big. Now, some of the things that Bill Clinton could testify to, and we will have to see what he talks about, is how much he knew about Epstein and Epstein's victims, etc. He was photographed in numerous spots with women and Epstein, etc. There was a photo, I believe, that came out in the Epstein files of Bill Clinton with an unnamed woman, uh, clearly appeared to at least be closer to middle aged. I'm guessing. Definitely not either barely 18 or under 18, from if I remember the image correctly. But we don't know who that woman was. And we don't know what else he knew. Now, uh, depending on what he knows, I'm fully expecting Bill Clinton to come out, probably answer questions truthfully, maybe try to tie them up into knots. Remember, I mentioned him answering the question, well, that depends on your definition of the word is. Bill Clinton is clever. Remember, it's Slick Willie, right? He's going to tie them up in knots. And I think he's going to find a way to spin this back and mention a lot about Donald Trump. Now, Hilary mentioned in her deposition, well, why aren't you, you're asking me questions. Why aren't you talking about people who are in the files? Bill Clinton, Howard Lutnick, Elon Musk, and others. And I don't know if she mentioned Musk, but I know she mentioned Lutnick and Donald Trump. And now that Bill Clinton is testifying, this is going to be interesting. Now, one of the things he could do, and he's already said it wasn't him, but remember, he will be under oath, so maybe this will be different. What happens to MAGA? There was that email that came out talking about Donald Trump blowing Bubba and giving Bubba a BJ. Well, if they go ahead and Donald and Bill Clinton comes out and says, "Yeah, I'm Bubba, and I know exactly what Donald Trump did. It happened," and rattles off a rough date of when it happened or whatever, MAGA's going to lose their mind because they can't stand the idea that hard Christian moral majority, like I said, they're not the moral majority, they are a very vocal minority, but they've got this idea that you can't be gay. You can't be, a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So what are they going to do if Bill Clinton comes out in his testimony and confirms that he did stuff with their Lord and Savior? They put Donald Trump up on this big pedestal and they call him, they treat him like the Lord and Savior, you know, and what are they going to do if it turns out that even if he didn't do anything with children, which I think he probably did, it's looking more and more likely based on things that have come out, um, that he did things with children. But even if he didn't, and he just did things with other dudes, like Bill Clinton, that would be the worst thing for MAGA to have to deal with. They would lose their ever loving minds. Now, we will see what the Bill Clinton testimony tomorrow ultimately brings. And it is going to be, I think, depending on what gets leaked out. I mean, obviously, it's behind closed doors. We are going to have to wait for them to release any transcripts or anything like that. And if he does come out and embarrass the shit out of Donald Trump in this meeting, the Republicans may be a little more hesitant to release that kind of information. Now, we will see how bad he embarrasses Donald Trump. And if it's bad enough, expect Donald Trump to have one hell of a meltdown and one hell of a response. Now, Dr. Oz, the head for Medicare and Medicaid, was holding a press conference. And he comes out and he's talking about their plan for the Affordable Care Act for next year. And from what I've read about this, now, after I did the TikTok audit, and I talked about it a little bit over on Mike's podcast on the Rational Boomer, and I've seen an article or two about this, and I almost hope that this is one of those stories that end up being not true and ends up being satire or something, and it got misconstrued along the way. And I'm hoping that's the case here. But supposedly, Dr. Oz comes out and says his plan for the ACA for next year is they are floating the idea of allowing insurance companies to offer plans with $15,000 deductibles $31,000 for family. Now think about that. For a lot of people, when you are making $15 an hour, you are in that 25 to $30,000 pay range. Okay. Now you're talking half your income before insurance kicks out for a lot of things. If you have to go to the doctor and there's no, and you don't have to pay a copay, but you have to cover everything up front until you hit your deductible, you could be screwed. Now, the other part about this, beyond these high deductible plans, is they are talking about, and this is the part where I'm hoping this is either satire, or it's misconstrued or something, because what they were talking about is that there would be no in-network doctors for these plans. But there also wouldn't be any out-of-network doctors. You would have to go and do the groundwork yourself and convince your doctor's office, your clinic, whoever, wherever you go, to accept this insurance plan. And then basically you would have to do the agreements. Well, you'll take my insurance and you're only going to charge this much for whatever, whatever, whatever. And that's where it almost sounds too stupid to be a real story. But at the same point, what I think they're trying to do is make these insurance plans, to make the ACA completely and totally unusable. They don't have a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act, to replace Obamacare. Remember, it was based on Romney Care. It's a Republican plan, but they don't have a plan to replace it, not in the least. So what do? They want to make it unusable. And by making it unusable, then when they can say, well, see, it's broken, it doesn't work, we can get rid of it now. And then they vote to get rid of it. And nobody's mad because it didn't work. At least that's how they think it works in their mind. They don't realize that a lot of us are going to go, yeah, it doesn't work because you fucking broke it. And that's the problem here. The Republicans think and they act like they have got it going on, that they are going to sail to the midterms. But I think they're only acting tough because they are absolutely terrified. Mike Johnson is sitting on the thinnest majority he has ever had. With the open seats and who is in Congress right now, Republicans have exactly 218. That is the minimum number to have the majority in a House of Congress. If one more Republican flips parties, resigns, dies, etc., and that seat is flipped by a Democrat, and the 3 open seats are flipped by Democrats, then theoretically Mike Johnson is no longer Speaker of the House. Now, how would that play out? Well, like I said over on the Rational Boomer podcast, what would happen is the Democrats, once that new member got sworn in, and I could see Mike Johnson fucking around with it a little bit, trying to hold off swearing in the number that would get Democrats over 218. The problem is, I don't know how far they could go with delaying it before they could get sworn in another way. I don't know if the courts would step in. I don't know if even his own party would say, okay, this is bullshit, because it would look ridiculous in the media and in the court of public opinion. But once the Democrats have a seated full majority, they would have to call for a vote to vacate the chair. They would vote out the Speaker of the House. And once they did, they would have to hold a vote to elect in a speaker. Now, in theory, that new speaker would end up being Hakeem Jeffries. And I know a lot of people aren't thrilled with Hakeem Jeffries. But for right now, he is the current minority leader in the House of Representatives. It would make sense that he becomes the next Democratic speaker. So that is what could happen. They are holding on to such a thin majority, but they are acting like they are winning. They are terrified. Mike Johnson comes out and says, "Well, if we lose the House in the midterms, that's the effective end of Donald Trump's presidency." Guess what? He's right. And I can't believe I'm agreeing with Mike Johnson, but this case he's 100% right, 110% right. Why? Because when Donald Trump ends up having a Democratic controlled House sitting against him, he won't be able to pass anything. All of the bullshit Donald Trump is trying to do is going to go away because it won't work. Now, since we're talking about the midterms, one of the last things I'm going to touch on before I wrap this up is Donald Trump comes out. He says he's going to declare a national emergency and he is going to stop mail in voting and he's going to force voter ID in the midterms, or at least that he's considering doing that or something. Well, here's the thing. He has already issued an executive order doing the exact same thing early in his presidency. The court's already said, go fuck yourself. That's not a thing. That is not constitutional. You can't do that. And it was just kind of left there. I don't think it was ever appealed to a higher court. I think the DOJ convinced him to look at doing it a different way. So they were looking at passing the SAVE Act. Well, the SAVE Act does not have what Donald Trump wants in it. Republicans already know that passing it in its entirety the way Donald Trump wants would be detrimental to them. So what'd they leave out? Well, Donald Trump wants no mail-in ballots unless you are a member of the military, genuinely disabled, or you are, maybe on vacation or something. Effectively, what mail-in ballots already are for most states. Now, some states do have, mail-in ballots for everybody. But see, they're just trying to limit the number of people who can vote because they are afraid that when voters turn out, Republicans lose. So Donald Trump says he's going to do all this shit and he's going to mess up the November elections. Well, court says he can't do it. They already tried that. And I think if it gets bad enough, even Republican voters are going to say, "What the fuck's going on here? This is bullshit." Why? Because Republicans love voting. They do. It's one of the things, especially old boomer era, baby boomer generation and older Republicans, they go vote for everything. There could be you know, a town vote and it's on whether or not to, you know, change the color that they light the Christmas tree up this year from red to blue or whatever. I don't know. Something silly like that. And if they're putting it up to a town vote. And guess what? Republicans show up every time, especially old Republicans. They love to show up to vote. So the Republicans in Congress are already saying, yeah, we're not doing this. Donald Trump has already tried the executive order route once, and that's not worked. And I fully expect him in the next, I don't know if it'll be the next days or at some point between now and the election. Either he's going to try it and walk it back, or he's going to come up with an excuse and back off of it already, saying, well, no, Congress is going to get this passed and everything. Now, while we're on that topic, real quick, before I wrap up, they like to push this idea of needing an ID to go vote. Well, here in Iowa, there are several ways to prove who you are, maybe not without a picture ID, but one of the things that came out over the weekend was, I think it was last weekend, maybe sometime earlier this week, I'm not sure. There was a big snowstorm heading for New York, and they were talking about Mamdani trying to pay people to go out and shovel and help clear streets and, do all of this. And they were paying good money, $30 an hour. Now, myself, that's too much work for me. I don't do the physical side of things as much anymore. But for $30 an hour, I might consider it. But anyway, uh, you know, one of the things that came out though is he said you need to bring two forms of ID. Well, guess what? That's just filling out job paperwork. That is normal. And some MAGA Republicans are coming out saying, "Well, see, you need an ID to go get a job, but you don't need an ID to vote." Again, this is filling out normal paperwork. Requiring any sort of an ID that has a fee, requiring to go get copies of birth certificates and marriage licenses and all that paperwork, if you don't have it, is a fee. Charging those to vote is a tax, and charging a poll tax is unconstitutional. It's not the same thing. Republicans love comparing apples to oranges, and getting something that is close and going, it's the same thing. And this is really not. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I encourage you to check out Friday's episode of the Rational Boomer podcast. Like I said a couple times throughout the this podcast, I was a guest over there. Mike and I had a great conversation. I encourage you to go check it out. So thank you for taking the time to join me. Hope you guys have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.